sexual scale business, geographically, there's always an element of coming better, self-improvement, and that can be a blessing, but it could also be a curse if you don't have that to listen to. So my entry-levelology kind of solution to whether it's choice nowadays, what should be exactly.
It goes hand in hand with, I made the wrong choice. You get that you sit in to someone else's guest and you can always find out, I thought it's going to be my house, before we were sharing our massive menus, but it probably is when it gets to this. So even things that we wouldn't chalk up as progress could take some sort of psychology.
tenanting, if that's such a thing. I just wonder whether on the day a housing association criticised over the death of a toddler, however, Ishak, a report into the association has found that it treated its residents then and now in dismissive, inappropriate and unsympathetic ways. Until the 2-year-old boy's inquest, the company had its mistakes. Is this then a time for the government to be giving landlords of all shapes and sizes bigger powers, more powers? We're a growing rental population, so is this the time to do that?
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 1 o'clock, reports warning a toxic culture of bullying at Birmingham's biggest hospital trust could be putting lives at risk. It's been looking at claims junior doctors were threatened if they flagged safety issues. Dr. Ravi Kumar's daughter was a doctor at Queen Elizabeth Hospital. She took her own life last year. He says he wants everyone to know what she went through.
My main worry is to stop it happening to others. And that is why I want to bring this forward, so that people realize that there is a toxic atmosphere.
The terror threat in Northern Ireland has been raised to severe from substantial. A statement says MI5 considers an attack from Northern Ireland-related terrorism is highly likely rather than likely. Ministers say the public should remain vigilant but not alarmed. Police in Portugal have shot a man after 2 people were stabbed to death at an Ismaili Muslim centre in Lisbon. The country's Prime Minister says everything points to it being an isolated act. 39 migrants have died in a fire at an immigration detention centre in northern Mexico. The National Immigration Institute said another 29 were injured at the facility across the border from El Paso. Police in the US state of Tennessee are examining a manifesto of an attacker who shot dead 6 people at a primary school in Nashville. The suspect was killed by police after they opened fire in the school. President Biden has called on Congress to take action on gun violence. Prince Harry is back at the High Court in London as legal proceedings continue in a wide-ranging privacy case. The Duke of Sussex and other individuals are suing Associated Newspapers Limited over claims they unlawfully gathered information. LBC's reporter Charlotte Lynch is following developments.
He's one of 7 high-profile figures, including Sir Elton John and the actresses Elizabeth Hurley and Sadie Frost, who accused the publisher of privacy breaches, including phone hacking, bugging and covert surveillance. Associated Newspapers Limited says it utterly and unambiguously denies the allegations. Charlotte Lynch, LBC, at the High Court.
Nicola Sturgeon has formally signed a letter of resignation and left her official residence at Bute House for the final time. This afternoon, Scotland's Parliament will elect new SNP leader Humza Yousaf as her successor as First Minister. In the city a short time ago, the FTSE 100 was trading up 5 points at 74.77. The pound buys $1.23 and €1.40. At LBC weather, rain moving east, followed by brighter conditions in the west, where it will become milder, a high of 13 degrees. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm Tim Humphrey.
Yeti's favourite mountain birds were returning for the season. So when he discovered up to 40% off the Amazon Spring Sale, he got himself a new HD camera. Now he's conducting a photo shoot with a family of snowfinches.
Yes! Working bitches!
Save up to 40% off on the Amazon Spring Sale. Now on, ends midnight on the 29th of March.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with Sheila Fogarty.
Hello there, good afternoon to you. It's well known that the number of people renting is growing and growing. We didn't used to be such a rental nation as we are, very different from other continental European countries. Everybody wanted their own little house, big or small, in fact, with a garden front and back. And that was people's ambition one way or another. But we are increasingly a rental population, particularly younger people finding it harder and harder to get on the housing ladder and be in charge of their own property. So I want to talk about just a couple of stories that it seems to me collide today. Very different stories, but in the same ballpark really. A housing association was heavily criticised over the death of of the little toddler, our Ishak, who lived in a mouldy flat owned by Rochdale Borough-wide Housing and whose death was very much attributed to that mould. They have been found in a report into their standards, their behaviour, their treatment of their residents to be wanting, to say the least. They say the report says they treat residents in dismissive, inappropriate or unsympathetic ways. Until the 2-year-old boy's inquest, the company had, it was told, struggled to learn from its mistakes, centering on mould in the case of our Ishak, but others as well. And I know that whenever we talk about housing, many of you who call in have real problems with the housing that you're living in and have that dismissive, unresponsive landlord, whether it's a housing association or a private landlord, that you just can't seem to get them to do the thing that you want them to do, the improvement that you say is needed, and they just say, oh, paint over it or whatever it is. There's various issues that you've raised with me. And so it begs the question, is now the time for a Prime Minister who owns multiple properties to point the finger at renters, really? That's what it feels like he's doing today with this call or suggestion that landlords will be given more powers over noise and nuisance when it comes from tenants, that the users of Airbnb or landlords who rent out their place to Airbnb will be given more powers to eject people, and that the Airbnb users themselves will be responsible if they, I don't know, cause a nuisance in the area. And I don't know, just those two stories seem to me to be colliding and neither really tackling the problems that you face. So tell me what the problems are that you face, and if you, in your housing, in the standards of your housing, and if you are somebody who rents out either your own property from time to time or another property to Airbnb, are there problems there with people who use the property? Have you abandoned that practice because of it? What powers do you think you needed that you didn't have? And landlords, what powers do you think you need that you don't have? 0345 606 0973, the number to call as ever. You can text 84850, you can tweet at LBC. I'm joined in the studio, I'm pleased to say, by Kwejo Twinaboa, social housing campaigner. Good afternoon to you.
Thank you for having me.
They do seem to collide, those two stories, don't they?
No, absolutely. I mean, on one hand, for the last 2 years, myself and other campaigners have been going around showing the absolutely disgraceful conditions that residents have had to live in, and then we've seen this tragic story of our Ishak, and then you've had that now contrasted with today, antisocial neighbours, the need to, well, the government suggesting that there's a need to increase the power for landlords to evict tenants, but we've already seen in Shelby One of Shelter's report, 143% increase in the last year in no-fault eviction, Section 21 being used. So my question is to the government, if they're saying that this is something that needs to happen and more tenants need to be evicted, where do they plan on putting them? Because we've already got 1.25 million people waiting to get into social housing as it is. Now they're suggesting this should happen. I mean, more and more tenants are going to get evicted. We are in a cost of living crisis. Things are becoming difficult for residents. Where do they plan on putting them? Where do they plan on putting the resident? Why is there no support? I think it's the government's attempt to claw back voters. I think that's what they've done without actually thinking what the reality is going to be if that does happen.
What, do you think landlords are likely to be our voting base, so let's throw something to the landlords?
Yeah, I think that's part of it. I do think that's part of it. I honestly wouldn't be surprised. I haven't looked into it in as much detail as I would have wanted to, but having looked at it and the suggestion that we need, or landlords need more power, on one hand I'm hearing that we need to get rid of no-fault evictions, and then on the other hand this is happening. I completely understand. I mean, there will be landlords out there saying, what about residents which do cause a problem with noise disturbances and antisocial behaviour? And that's something I've experienced myself when my dad was ill. I had a neighbour next door that would blast the music at all hours religiously every night, and after a few months he was evicted. But you have to be very, very careful, because you have individuals that live in social housing, private housing, who are vulnerable, and those with mental health challenges. How are the government going to measure this, or are they just going to evict all of those people too?
If somebody who lives in who rents a property is either causing disturbance to other neighbours or to the property itself, maybe, pretty strong powers already exist, don't they, to tackle that?
Yeah, and landlords do say on their part it's difficult and it's a long process and it does cost them money in order for them to do that. But the possibility is there. In contrast, though, for tenants living in disrepair and that do have bad landlords, you can't just go and return your property to them and say, do you know what, I'm not happy with the conditions that I'm living in and I'm having to pay X amount in rent. And in the private sector, it's worse because we've looked at rental prices and how shocking in some cases they are. They can't just go and return that property because then they have to effectively move out if they want change. So you've got those two things almost fighting each other. And I mean, I'll give you one case. Only recently I heard from someone that reached out on Twitter to me to tell me that one of their friends, for example, was sharing a property. It was a 5-bedroom property, all paying $1,500 per room in that property. And we're in a cost of living crisis. Yeah, a month. You cannot
More than my mortgage.
Right, exactly. And you cannot then think, well, what if they default on their rent? Of course, anyone having to pay that amount and having to choose between eating
were these young
and
people?
Yeah, they were students. University students, yeah. And they reached this person, yeah. And it's not the lone case that I've seen. So as much as there are landlords out there that get on with their tenants and tenants get on with their landlords, especially in the private sector, there are many out there exploiting the system, exploiting Section 21 notices and evicting tenants left, right and centre.
And just before we came on air, I know you were talking briefly about, and you could give me more detail now if you would, about the housing associations that are given X amount of money in order to do repairs, for example, but hold it back.
So it was that in terms of the private management companies that I was talking about. Yeah, so there was a report yesterday that was out that absolutely...
Sorry, that wasn't housing associations, no?
No, this was a private management company, and they were given... So they're given money by local authority in order to house homeless individuals, some of the most vulnerable people in our country. And there was a report, I believe it was over 800 million, don't quote me on that though, it's in its millions, hundreds of millions have been given to these private management companies since 2019 in order to house homeless individuals. Now the conditions that they were living in and that was exposed was absolutely slum conditions that I saw. You couldn't describe it as anything else. Damp, mould, missing windows, people having to use bin bags to stop air getting into their home because they stop drafts because they don't have that support. They don't have. It's full of disrepair ultimately.
And let's talk about mould. Last time we did, not you and I, last time I did on air, I had a call from a building engineer essentially who said mould doesn't just come, because the window's broken or because it's all about the relationship between the air coming in and the temperature of the house inside so it's about ventilation and heating, that he described. Almost suggesting that that's an easy thing to fix if you get that relationship right between the air in and the temperature of the air in the room, so that in the winter, unless you've got heating on, the air will get very cold. And if you don't heat that air because you're worried about the cost of your electricity bills or your gas bills, then that air will stay cold, it will interact with the outside air and form mould because of the moisture in the air as well. I think I'm remembering that correctly.
Yeah.
But he seemed to be suggesting that was a relatively easy fix if you can get the balance between inside air and outside air right, with a bit of ventilation and the right level of heating. Does that sound like...
I don't think it's an absolute solution to all circumstances, because even last...
It's not always possible.
No, and I went into homes only this winter. Well, recently we only had snow, and I remember going into a resident's homes, windows open, heating on full blast, and the home was windowsills absolutely soaked.
Why were the windows open with the heating on full blast?
Well, the windows were
allow
open.
Some ventilation.
Yes, exactly, to allow air into the property to try and help the issue of damp and mould. But in every single room there was damp and mould that was forming, and I don't think these housing providers actually understand the different types of mould that can grow in your home. I don't think they've invested in enough scientific research to actually find proper solutions.
I've noticed in what we've in London, there's a lot of high density living, isn't there, where what used to be a family home is now 3 or 4 flats or whatever. And I know when my flat is such a building, so I have the raised ground floor flat on a building of an old Victorian house basically. And when I first moved in, there was condensation all over the windows and I realised it had no air brick in the living room. Air brick in the living room, jobs are good and fixed, It's sometimes relatively small fixes like that that are just ignored and not done, and that can really cause illness for people.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've spoken about before the health effects that it can have. And a lot of these issues that I go into, there's been a huge culture of blaming tenants. Open your window. For the last 40 years, open your windows, stop drying your clothes indoors, stop using your shower, stop bathing, stop ritual bathing, whatever that is. And then you actually go in there, or I go in there and actually look and get the organisation to look into it. And it's a structural issue. It's down to poor quality. It's down to leaks. It's down to leaks from the roof that hasn't been dealt with. It's rising damp. These sorts of issues, but they've just assumed in first instance, right, damp and mould, it has to be the tenant's fault. Let's blame them. Let's get someone in to wash it off with a bit of bleach and paint over it. And because we can't see it on that day in our post-inspection or the next day, it means it's done. We can tick it off. 3 weeks later, the damp and mould's growing back, even worse than what was there before.
Well, that's certainly what happened to our web, isn't it?
Absolutely.
You know, and the cost to that family just... I mean, do you think that's the biggest issue going around?
In terms of damp and mould, that's the most complaints that I get. Having said that, I have to stress there are far more sort of different issues when it comes to disrepair in people's homes. I've been in homes and I've been stood 1.5 inches in raw sewage because of back surges through the toilets and through the showers due to lack of management and maintenance. I've been in homes where sewage is running down people's walls. You've got ceilings that have collapsed due to leaks. You've got cockroaches, you've got mice, you've got asbestos, disturbed asbestos in people's homes where ceilings have collapsed and it's not been dealt with for years with kids living in these properties. Disrepair goes far wider than damp and mould.
And is there a typical setup? If you see, because there's lots of different arrangements for rental these days, aren't there? There's private, there's housing association, whatever. Is there a typical picture, or is it across the board?
In terms of if it is in private, if it is
when it's bad.
It's really bad in social housing, but we have far less social housing properties. So to make the assumption that it's worse in the private sector is very accurate. And I mean, at least I guess in social.
So lots of people who would have been in social housing are in private rental.
Yes, and even people that are homeless, but just because we simply don't have enough social housing, they are sort of